Hello all, welcome back to another session of The Analyst for 4th of September 2023, where we will be discussing the most important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. So looking at the developed countries, we find that we have India's climate goals at the very first. Then it will be followed by how our constitution is amended. Then we shall discuss how North Korea actually conducted a tactical nuclear attack drill. Next, we'll be looking at what is a global sovereign debt roundtable, and finally, we will be wrapping the session with autonomous hill councils. Now, before we begin the session, I want to tell you that the handout for this discussion is available in the description below. So, do check it out. Now the very first article is very important for our GS3 because here our Prime Minister is talking about the need for India to achieve its climate change goals. Here the context is that the Prime Minister of India told that India is not leaving any stone behind to achieve its climate action targets, and also it is contributing to less than 5% of the cumulative global carbon dioxide emissions. Now, before going into details, let us understand what are India's climate change goals. Now see, the world is seeing a reeling attack of the climate change impact. We are seeing this through various incidents of say pollutions, rising incidence of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is leading to global warming. So therein the United Nations framework for climate change actually decided in Paris Agreement in 2015 that every nation in the world will be having something known as nationally determined contributions. Now these are known as national goals, or nations as a whole, they will be deciding what should be the climate change action plans we are going to take. For example, such as how to reduce the amount of CO2, how to reduce the amount of pollution, how to reduce the amount of toxicity in the environment. So on 3rd August 2022, our own cabinet actually approved the updated India's NDCs, because at the 26th COP at Glasgow in 2021, the Prime Minister of India announced something known as Panchamrit, or 5 nectar elements. So let me tell you, these are actually the climate goals of India. Now what are the 5 goals? The 5 goals, the very first is reaching the non-fossil fuel capacity to 500 gigawatt by 2030. Next is about fulfilling 50% of India's energy requirements via renewable energy by 2030. Then we will be striving to reduce 1 billion of carbon emissions by 2030. Then we will be also interested in reducing India's carbon intensity to around 45% of GDP. Finally, we will be achieving the net zero target by 2070. So these are all India's aspirations, and our Prime Minister is telling that India is far ahead of even G20 countries by at least 9 years in its climate change actions. And he is not telling out of thin air, because we have some data to back it up. The very first, we can see that India's annual fossil fuel CO2 emissions per capita can be seen from this figure. If we see, India is at around 1.8% of the entire world. If we see, the USA is at the first, followed by Russia, Japan, China, then the EU countries. So we can say that India is at the very bottom, because India has not emitted that amount of carbon dioxide. Then if we can see India's current energy mix, or the sources from which India derives its energy from, around 250 megawatt is coming from coal and other fossil fuels. But it is not enough, right? That is why India is also ramping up its renewables. And let me tell you, this is 50% at least more than the fossil fuels. So it is very impressive that a country like India is actually generating much of its power from renewable energy like wind, the solar power, these kind of things. Then we also have something known as nuclear power, right? According to Climate Change Performance Index 2023, right, we can see India is among the top 10 countries in the entire world who has effective policies regarding to climate change. And we can see countries like US, Canada, Russia, China, these are all bad performers. The good performers are actually shown in this table. We have Denmark, Sweden, Chile, Morocco and India, who are the top 10 good performers with respect to climate change. Then if I can quote more data, we can see the country, right? India as a country is among the cheapest countries when it comes to wind power, right? And solar power, correct? So India is one of the lowest in the entire world. We can see when we compare to countries like China, Brazil, Chile, Australia and so on, we can see the amount of energy per say solar unit and wind unit is much lower, right? Which is good, because India as a country has invested a lot of energy and lot of money into these sectors. Then India is also among the top 5 global markets, right? If we can see here, India is among the top markets, top 10 global markets when it comes to renewable energy. We can see we are actually being followed by US, Germany, China, France, Spain. So among the developed and developing countries, India is also one of them. So here, let us see what are the efforts that India actually took that we are having so much good and positive data. Firstly, India actually ramped up its solar capacity by 20 times, right? 20 times in just a few years. This is a very big achievement, right? Then India is also among the top 4 nations when it comes to wind energy, because specifically the southern states have invested a lot of money and resources when it comes to wind energy. Next, we are seeing electric vehicle revolution. Companies such as Ola, Hyundai, Toyota, they are all releasing electric cars, right? And here we have to understand that India is far ahead in terms of some even developing countries. So with respect to electrical vehicle. Then we have something known as Coalition for Disaster Resilience. This is a coalition of like-minded countries like India who are building its infrastructure with respect to disasters like say cyclone. So we are also building and helping other countries becoming a part of this coalition. Then we have something known as International Solar Alliance, which is actually spearheaded by India, because India believes in one concept known as one world, one sun, one grid. That means we have one sun, and from sun we are getting solar energy. So let us utilize this one sun which we have in terms of generating solar energy, because even when we are getting solar energy, we are getting as a single earth. So let us create a single grid across the entire earth so that each and every part of the world can be connected by a solar energy. And this is a very good idea. Even developed countries such as France supports India in this manner. Then we have also a forum of India and Pacific Island countries. This is a forum spearheaded by India for some Pacific Island countries who are very vulnerable, towards climate change impacts such as global warming, global rise in sea level, some in instances of conflicts they face with respect to their coral stocks. So for Pacific Island countries, India has also launched a forum. Then India's Prime Minister has also announced a very innovative mission, which is known as Mission for a Life or Lifestyle for Environment. Here the Prime Minister is urging people to actually mold their lifestyle according to environment, that is adopting more eco-friendly manners. Then we have as a country have also slated to ban single-use plastic, right? And India is also taking huge steps in this regard. And finally, we are also contributing to safe sanitation and cleanliness measures such as Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, and also constructing open defecation free toilets, right? So we are also taking these measures which puts India at the very forefront of climate goals initiatives, right? Now, the Prime Minister in his interview was very optimistic, and obviously we have extremely positive notions of India's climate change goals, right? And according to our Prime Minister, India has a can-do spirit, right? That means the future of the fight against climate change has to be adopted via such an affirmative and positive response, right? But there are also some challenges, and that's why India must not be too much optimistic. There must be some balanced optimism. Here we have to understand that there are some issues with India's implementation, right? For example, say if I talk of the installed capacity of solar panels, India actually has a target of achieving 100 gigawatts, right? But so far, the installed capacity is still facing a 32 gigawatt gap, as we can see in this gap here, right? So there are still gaps of around 32 gigawatts, which is a huge. So India needs to, raise its funding. India needs to raise its policies. Then also, with respect to climate finance, according to Economic Survey of 2020-21, it is being said that India needs $2.5 trillion or around 11 lakh crore Indian rupees to actually meet the gap of climate change, as we can see here. The gap is huge. India needs around this amount, but India is still at this amount. So there is a huge gap here with respect to climate finance. Then there are also blame games by the global north, countries such as Germany, UK, right? Even the United States, Canada. They do not recognize their historical responsibilities of huge carbon dioxide emissions. So that is also a part where the Western countries, the developed countries, are trying to push the blame games against India's favor. Then finally, the people cannot be ignored, because not always the government will be at the forefront, right? Because we as people, we need to adopt lifestyle for environment, right? And that is only we will be understanding that we have to adopt planet conscious behavior, right? So in this way only our prime ministers try to emphasize, and we shall be trying to also keep these things in mind. The next article is about the notion of one nation, one election, but we are not going to talk about that because that has been discussed before. What we are going to talk about here is about how the Indian constitution is amended, because here the notion that is there, that we have in GS2 the very basic features of our Indian constitution, and here we have amendments also, right? And from a PYQ from 2019, we can say that UPSC will be asking you questions with respect to amendment and concepts such as basic structure, as we can see here. So let us try to understand this issue and delve into the concept. Here, the context is that the Law Ministry has actually formed a committee headed by our former president, right, Ramnath Kovind. And there, they have gave some terms of reference as to how India can go forward with one nation, one election. And here, one of the terms of condition is to examine if we are to implement this one nation and one nation, one election, do we need to amend the constitution taking the state governments ratification, because it is one of the three ways in which we can amend the constitution. So let us see what is an amendment to the constitution at the very basic level. Now, amendment, we mean that we have to change a certain aspect of our constitution. Now, why do we need to change? Because with time, everything changes, right? In ethics, we have studied that even the strictest of laws need to be modified with time. Right, so constitution also was framed around say 70 to 75 years ago, right? So it will also need to be changed with the requirements of the day, and that is why the constitution makers, our fathers of the constitution, and they have tried to insert some provision through which we can readily change according to our needs. Now, in this respect, we have to understand that there are two countries, the UK and the US, right? Now, here we have to understand the UK constitution is totally flexible, right? It can be changed very easily. But the US constitution was the most, and even it is now the most rigid constitution, because to change the provisions of the constitution, we need the ratification of at least 3/4 of the individual states. Right? That means overall, all the state governments in the United States, they have to ratify, right? In the measure of around 3/4. So, India did what? It adopted a balanced constitution. India tried to adopt the best of both worlds. Now, in India, we can amend the constitution in two ways generally. One is the informal way, through which it is only the judiciary which takes the initiative of, say, utilizing some of the terms and conditions mentioned in the constitution, right? For example, the collegium system of the Supreme Court and the High Court that we have today is actually based on an informal modification of our constitution, right? The collegium system is not there, right? And it is not there via, say, any provisions, but that was a way of how judiciary evolved the collegium from the constitution, right? That was an informal way through which we can amend the constitution. But this is not that significant. What is significant is the formal way, where we have a particular article of Article 368 of the Indian Constitution, in where any amendment procedure can be begun, or say it can be started at any either house of the parliament, that is either the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha, and not any state governments cannot try to amend the constitution, right? Because the parliament is actually the sovereign body, right? It is at the national level, and it will be only the parliament who will be able to modify the constitution, not the state governments. And there is further three types through which the constitution can be amended. First is the simple majority. Next, we will be amending via special majority. And finally, we will be having some specific, amendment in which states needs to ratify. So let us see the three types. The first type is a way where we can, amend the constitution via very simple majority. Here, we have provisions such as this, right? I'm not going to read all of them. Please go through all of them, because there will be a prelims question, asking you to, pinpoint some of the amendments. Here we have to understand that these are not under Article 368, right? These are not under Article 368. These are outside, right? Because in various parts of the constitution it has been written that no such law shall be deemed to be an amendment of the constitution for the purposes of Article 368. For example, if I pick up this citizen acquisition and termination, right? That means in the article pertaining to this provision, it is written that it won't be counted as an amendment under Article 368. So it leaves these all provisions outside Article 368. So let us be clear on this. And let me tell you, these are very minor changes that sometimes the parliament may be prompted to modify. So these are not actually under the basic structure of the constitution. They are generally not considered, right? While some may be, but they are majorly not considered. And because these are relatively minor, and for these amendment bills to be introduced in the parliament, they do not need any quorum, and by simple majority we need the simple majority of the MPs to be present and voting, right? Now the next kind of amendment is through special majority. Here it is kind of serious, because we have now provisions such as the fundamental rights, such as the DPSP, and any other provisions that are in the say first, that is simple majority, and then ratification, which are not there, which they will be also considered. Here we have to understand that fundamental rights and DPSB, these are quite serious. That is why they need a special majority, and by special majority we means that the 50% of the members that must be present and voting, they must be voting here. And also special majority means not less than 2/3 of the members present and voting, right? So both of the conditions need to be necessarily fulfilled, right? While actually the special majority is actually needed at the third reading of the bill, but by convention we follow this at every stage of the bill, right? So we have to understand that special majority needs adequate caution, because these are very serious provisions of the constitution. So they need special majority at all stages, though it is only for voting at the third stage, but by convention we follow adequate caution in all of the stages, right? And this is according to rule number 158, where total membership has been specifically mentioned, that it is the total member or the total number of members of the house irrespective of any vacancies, right? So we have to keep this in mind. And finally, we have the third way of amending the parliament, where amending the constitution, where we have to understand this is concerning the state government. That means it is not at the state legislatures, right? But the process is actually begun at the Parliament of India, where it needs special majority in the parliament, and also states ratification, where at least half or 50% of the states must ratify that provision. And what are those provisions? Now here, the provisions are specifically mentioned in the constitution as entrenched provision. Now let me tell you, these are the only provisions which are specifically mentioned in the constitution. The first and the second categories of simple and special majorities, they are not specifically mentioned. They are not specifically listed, but these are listed under Article 368, right? And these are the entrenched provision, or these are the provision which considers the federal character of the Indian Constitution. And let me give you some examples. In 2014, we had the 99 Constitution Amendment, where it was about the constitution of NJAC, right? It was a body to determine the appointments to our judiciary, and it was actually ratified by many states. And similarly, in 2016, we had the GST bill, or the 122nd Constitutional Amendment Bill, right? It was concerning the states, because GST is a provision that concerns the states and the center's revenues, indirect tax revenues. So that is why it was also required the ratification of various state governments. So these are the provisions we have to keep in mind, which need special majority plus states ratification, where at least half of the states is to ratify. Okay, now we have to understand that can we change, or can the parliament change any provisions in via these three ways, right? No, because we have already seen also in previous analyst discussions, we have something known as basic structure that evolved, right, after a series of cases, and that ultimately culminated in the Keshwananda Bharati case of 1973, where the amending power of the parliament under Article 368 is actually limited. The power is limited. Why? Because the parliament does not have ultimate power to amend any provision of the constitution. There are some provisions which are very innate, which are very important, which are known as basic structure. This means provisions such as the fundamental rights of the citizen, provisions such as the judiciary, provisions such as the federal characteristics of the polity of India. These are very essential for the healthy performing of India's democracy, and that is why we need a proper basic structure, which are the core elements, core principles of any constitution, so that cannot be violated. And that is why the Supreme Court has the power to review any say amendment, right? And that is why we also have a term such judicial review. That means the Supreme Court, right, has the power to review the constitutional amendments, right? And this will be acting as a safeguard to actually preserve the stability and integrity of the Indian Constitution, because Supreme Court will be kind of a watchdog for the Indian Constitution. And here, one example comes to mind is of the Kyoto Holohan case, which actually concerned about the anti-defection law, right? This was concerned about the 10th schedule of the Indian Constitution, where while the Constitution Amendment Bill was actually introduced, the government specified that the judiciary will not intervene. So we know that judiciary is a basic structure. So the Supreme Court struck it down that the judiciary shall definitely intervene if there are any issues with respect to 10th schedule, right? So this is one very significant case, and there are many cases where Supreme Court has time and again acted as a safeguard against this amendment power of the parliament. And the idea is actually, while the constitution can evolve, right, that is why amendment is there, it can evolve, but its core principles can never be violated, right? Its core values of democracy, of fundamental rights, of say rule of law, they cannot be violated, and they must remain intact. Now here in this next article, we have the issue coming from North Korea, where it has said that it has engaged in a tactical nuclear test. Now this is important. Why? In GS2 we have topics like effect of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interest. Now we have here the context of North Korea conducting a simulated tactical nuclear attack drill. Right here it is been reported that this country, this rogue nation, is kind of conducting these nuclear tests, right? And let me introduce you to what is actually a tactical nuclear attack drill. Now, you have to understand this tactical nuclear attack is not an actual attack. It is just to stimulate a attack on a particular controlled area, such as a small area such as a battlefield or a military base of that own country, right? So it will be testing its weapon and also its capability of the military forces to respond to any nuclear attacks. So it is just a test, right? This is just a test. This is not a direct attack. So here we have to understand these are generally consisting of inert weapons which are not say potential of destroying say habitants, or if it is say capable of destroying livelihoods and people, but it will be on a simulated level. That means it will be under testing conditions, right? It can be having say non radioactive materials, right? It can be say the weapons can be having a look and behave of a nuclear weapon, but actually it is not, right? It can be also sometimes that the nation can even use computer modeling to actually stimulate an attack, right? So these are the ways in which we can conduct these tactical tests. And countries like US, Russia, China, they have time and again done this. Now why they have done this? Because there is something known as nuclear deterrence. Now we shall understand what is nuclear deterrence, because here North Korea has essentially did one type of a nuclear deterrence where it is trying to demonstrate that it is actually capable of firing nuclear weapons, right? And it is also a threat to the rest of the world. Now let us understand what is nuclear deterrence. See, nuclear deterrence is actually a way to prevent a nuclear war, right? Now we know that the last and the only nuclear war actually took place when the US dropped 2 bombs on Japan, and even this has been recently in the popular media through a very popular movie by Christopher Nolan, Oppenheimer, right? In Oppenheimer, we also saw that a nuclear war is fraught with risks, right? Because it is concerning about the splitting of a nucleus, right? And having tremendous damage, right? Here we have seen the cases of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, how it was destroyed, and also we have seen through various non-nuclear attacks such as the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, which can potentially destroy lives and livelihoods of lots and lots of people. And that is why nations, especially nuclear capable nations, they are not ready to always launch a full out nuclear war with respect to any provocation. And that is why this is one of the US military policies, right, where we are combining military capabilities and military deterrence with nuclear weapons. That means to prevent a nuclear war, we are actually investing in more nuclear weapons, so that while having the nuclear weapon, we can tell others that we have nuclear weapons, we can do tremendous damage on you if you provoke us, right? And on the other hand, if the other country also has nuclear weapon, that country will also doing the same thing, right? Now let us understand nuclear deterrence through a very simple example. Because it is a game of possibilities, and in the field of economics, we have something known as game theory, right? To understand the logic behind, let us understand how a nuclear war can be avoided. Such as, let us take an example of the USSR or the Soviet Union and the US. Now say they both have nuclear weapons, right? Let us assume that they have both nuclear weapons, and say with respect to any provocation, the US has two options. They can use nuclear weapons to totally destroy say the Soviet due to a provocation, or they cannot use. The same options are also available with the USSR, that they can use nuclear weapons in any provocation from the US, or they cannot use. So let us understand what are the outcomes. Say if the US is using nuclear weapons, right, the Russia will be losing. Then if Russia is also in response to US's use of nuclear weapons, they are also use. So US will be losing. So both of the countries lose, because nuclear weapons inflict tremendous disaster on both of the countries. It is not always a matter of say straight away attacking a country. Nuclear weapons have huge range of disaster, right? So that is why both of the countries lose. Now say, if USA doesn't use and US use, right, then there will be win-lose. Then also on the other case, if USSR uses and the US don't use, then there will be lose and win. So these are the circumstances where neither the US is comfortable nor the USSR is comfortable, because in the case the other countries are losing out, so they will not be comfortable. So to reduce damage, as seen in this lose-lose scenario, the two countries will never use nuclear weapon, because they know that if they use even once, the other country will be responding with nuclear weapons. So let us not win, and that is what peace is. We need to have weapons so that the other country can be afraid of our arsenal, right? And they will be not using those weapons. So this is a win-win situation. This is to avert mutually assured destruction, because in a nuclear war, both of the countries are destroyed, right? And this is what we are actually seeing in the world right now. Let us understand what are the advantages and issues with this nuclear deterrence. First advantage is that it helps in averting a world war. Right? All of the countries know that some of the countries have nuclear weapons, so they will not be using the weapons. Right? It is also to achieve some stability in the world affairs. Right? Because some of the nuclearized countries of the West, and even say in our own neighborhood, China, Pakistan, India, they are all nuclear countries. So due to their weapon, they are actually in a stable condition as of now. Then we have to also understand that nuclear weapons also enhance the global credibility of a nation, and that is why one of the reasons was of the 1998 India's nuclear test was actually to enhance our global credibility as a nation. Finally, we have to understand that it is also having a geostrategic advantage to countries, right? And it is actually prohibiting coercion. That means any countries such as the US, such as Russia, they cannot coerce other countries. They cannot blackmail other countries into yielding to their demands, right? Then, but the limitations are also there. The limitations are in the way that some of the countries will be nuclear haves and have-nots, such as most of the African nations, they do not have any nuclear weapons, right? Some of the Asian countries they have. So this is creating an unequal advantage, right? Then the complete deterrence can be a myth, because time and again in the Russia-Ukraine crisis, we have seen that while Ukraine was not nuclearized, Russia, being a nuclear power, they time and again threatened Ukraine that we will be launching nuclear attacks, don't provoke us. So it can be a myth if some countries are provoked beyond measure, right? Then there are also other alternatives which are far more devastating than nuclear weapons, such as biological wars, right? If we geo-engineer a particular virus strain to say spread disease in a particular enemy country, all of the nation's citizens will be decimated in a matter of few days and weeks, right? So this is far more potential and far more dangerous than nuclear weapons, right? Then there is also rise in economic warfare between countries such as US, China, who are going beyond nuclear deterrence in terms of economic trade disputes. Then we have also non-state actors such as terrorists. If they get to avail of nuclear weapons, we can only imagine the scale of disaster, right? So we have to also, in addition to deterrence, we also have to assure the security of the arsenal. Then we have to understand that some states such as North Korea are actually rogue states. They are outside the law, outside the international law. They can also claim nuclear deterrence, such as we have seen right now, is form of tactical attacks. Then also we have to understand nuclear weapons are somewhere registered on the cyberspace. So there can be cyber attacks triggering the fallout of a cyber nuclear war, right? Now let us understand India's nuclear doctrine here. Our own former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee on May 27, 1998, he actually gave us some India's principles that India will be having a credible minimum deterrence, that India will be having a particular set of nuclear weapons that will be acting as a deterrence, not attack. Because India will be following no first use, that means in any conflicts, right, we will not be using nuclear weapons first. We will not be firstly using the weapons. But if we face any nuclear weapon from any enemy country, we will be launching a massive retaliation, right? That will be beyond any measure. And we will not be using nuclear weapons again non-nuclear states or those countries such as even say Nepal, Bhutan, which do not have any nuclear weapon, will not be using against them. And finally, nuclear attacks or nuclear retaliation can also be done in response to any biological or chemical weapons in India. So these are the principles that India tries to obey by, and also India has proved that it is very disciplined when it comes to nuclear deterrence because we had the Kargil war. We have India-China conflicts going on, right? But we did not see nuclear attack from India's side, nor we did not see nuclear attack from their side. So we can say that India is successfully maintaining a nuclear deterrence. And here, let us say that the way ahead is that nuclear deterrence is actually valid in a post-war, post-Cold War, world, because we are surrounded by countries which have nuclear arsenals, right? Countries like Pakistan, which have more or less to what we have in our nuclear weapons. So we need to have the weapons as deterrence. And we can understand from the Russia-Ukraine crisis, where there have been various blackmails, there have been various ways of coercion, right? There have been even coercion from the West in terms of NATO. So we have to understand the lessons from this conflict is that there has to be a nuclear deterrence. And countries like these rogue nations of say North Korea, they use these weapons as bargaining chips. So we have also to be aware of these kind of things, right? And finally, we have to understand that not all hopes are dead. There are still scopes of dialogues and diplomacy which actually can lead to more and more benefits when it comes to nuclear weapons, right? So the countries must be always open for dialogue and diplomacy. And that is what India is also time and again stressed in its own conflicts and also in say conflicts like Russia and Ukraine. Okay, so this should be the way ahead for India. The next article here is again with reference to our Prime Minister's speech, where this section is very important for prelims examination in economics area, where we have a term mentioned by our Prime Minister known as Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable. Now this is a term which he tried to mention with respect to our world's sovereign debt, because as of now there has been a global rise in sovereign debt, or this means the debt that nations owe to other nations, other organizations, private institutions, because as a nation we have to understand it is duty of a nation is to do welfare, and welfare schemes, infrastructure schemes, they take a lot of money, and that is why time and again countries try to rely on the loans given by institutions, countries. So with respect to sovereign debt, let us understand through India's example first. We have two kinds of debt. One is a central government debt, one is a state government debt. Under central government, we have internal debt in terms of these institutions and these instruments. We have also external debt from countries such as some institutions such as IMF, IBRD, World Bank, Japan, US, UK, France. Then we have also some other liabilities. Specifically, this will be under the public account of India. So let us not go into public account of India right now. Let us be concerned about the debt. Under state government, we have also internal debt. We have loans and advances from the central government, and also we have some other liabilities. This can be the state government liabilities, right, such as provident fund. So this is a total public debt structure in India. Now we have to understand, when you consider the entire world, when we consider the developing countries from 2010, right, from 2010 to 2021, we can see the amount of debt from private creditors, or say from private banks, global banks such as Credit Suisse, Barclays. This has actually rose, right? And let me tell you, the bilateral creditors, or say any one country such as China, such as US, they also give loans to countries. Now, one of the major countries here, the largest country, right, under bilateral creditor is China, right? And China is giving more loans to developing countries, particularly African countries, Pakistan, to actually do something known as debt trap. So there, China is actually trapping the developing countries via, giving loans and debts. Now, we have to understand that, let us take India's case here. When we consider India's debt, total debt, right? Both internal and external. We have to understand that most of the debt in India is actually of internal in nature, if you can see the color coding here. So mostly it is the internal, that is around say 93% is internal and around say 6.8% is of external. So this will be very important for our prelims because they ask about trends. So let us be cognizant of this fact. Now, with reference to sovereign debt international, because countries have debts abroad, some of the international initiatives actually begun in the aftermath of 2020 COVID pandemic, because it was a time when most of the countries actually took loans from others. One such initiative was the debt services suspension initiative, where around say 73 countries around the world who are actually developed, least developed, developing, least developed countries. So they are actually asked to not pay their debt because the pandemic is very painful for them to bear. They have to help their people, vaccinate their people, feed their people. So let us not take the debt from them. So actually, it was a global initiative, it was a good initiative, right? Where the debt was actually suspended for them. And 1773 eligible countries neither paid interest nor any principal on their debt. So it was a very good initiative. It was followed by a common framework for debt treatment, which was also a G20 measure. And this is the only multilateral mechanism for forgiving and restructuring the debt. For example, in Sri Lanka, it is not able to pay back the debt. So we must be say forgiving the debt, say we are not interested in taking the debt anymore, or say we can restructure debt, say we are trying to reduce the debt, right? So this is the only multilateral mechanism. But the thing is that there are some issues that only 3 countries such as Chad, Ethiopia and Zambia actually applied for debt treatment, but none of them received it. And that is why India through G20 presidency tried to bring up initiatives such as Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable, where countries all over the world, right, will be brought to resolve their debts. This will be co-chaired by the IMF, World Bank and India, because it is the president of G20. Here, the official bilateral creditors, both traditional creditors and members of the Paris Club will be present. Here, we have to understand there are also private creditors here, such as private banks, and also the borrowing countries. So this is a ground table where the nations will be discussing about their debt. Now we have a term known as the Paris Club. Let us understand that Paris clubs are actually these countries, right? These are actually, the secretariat is located at Paris, France, and the membership we can see. These are all the countries which are kind of developed in nature. And these are the countries which actually gives loans to most of the nations, such as the developed countries. So this was actually founded by 1956, and they've actually found various rules and regulations how to give loans to, say, various other countries. Now the focus of this GSDR is actually about process and standards, not to discuss any country's records, right? It is more about the process and standards. It is not replacing any existing schemes such as the common framework, right? It is about easing the bottlenecks. It is about giving more clarity on how to set cut-off dates of debt, how to say assess and enforce compatibility of the treatment of debt on, say, stressed nations such as Chad, Ethiopia, Sri Lanka, right? They take debt. And it is also about the sharing of information between the various stakeholders, right? So this will be a very welcome initiative to be actually appreciated. Now, coming to our last article, it is about the debate which is going on in Manipur, and the issue has been dragging on for ages. But here we will be talking about how the Manipur government is actually contemplating a amendment, right, to its hill councils. Now to understand this, we have to understand what are autonomous hill councils, right? Now we have to understand that the northeast area of India was actually from time and again, right, from the pages of history, they were occupied by tribal populations which were indigenous. And according to some anthropologists, they are so unique that they actually reflect that, the centuries old traditions that they still follow today. So the government both the British government back, in the imperial times, and even the government right now, they were time and again very interested in preserving their custom, social life, lifestyle, right? So accordingly, when the British came in the initial days, they actually excluded the areas of Northeast and gave them some names such as excluded areas and partially excluded areas under the Government of India Act of 1935. Now here, some federal laws, some provincial laws will be generally typically needing the governor's assent before actually applicable to that area for their peace and development. Now after independence, according to Gopinath Bordoloi committee, it was recommended that we must be bringing these areas which were under the Government of India Act of 1935, which were discussed previously. We have to bring this area under 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution. So this was a recommendation. And also we must be creating something known as autonomous district councils in these states: Meghalaya, Mizoram, Tripura and Assam. And accordingly, we have to also create regional councils under the ADCs to actually also recognize some minor tribes. Okay, so under Article 244, under the 6th schedule, which was finally introduced in the Indian Constitution, the autonomous administrative divisions were given autonomies. Autonomies in the field of legislature, judiciary and administrative. So these areas have some leeway with respect to legislative, judicial and administrative autonomy. Here we have to understand that the membership of ADCs, right, are around up to 30 members, where they will be each having a term of 5 members, and the governor will be nominating 4 of them, while the remaining 26 will be elected on the basis of universal adult franchise. The tenure of the district councils, the autonomous district councils, will be of 5 years, right? And here the role of the governor will be very important, right, in the states that we have discussed here, right? Then the powers and functions of the ADCs will be revolving around the rules, laws, regulations with regard to land, forest, water, agriculture, village council, health, sanitation. So a lot of things, both of civil nature, criminal nature, they will be, given some power to make rules, regulations. And here, the ADCs also have the power to form courts to hear cases also. But here the maximum sentence has to be less than 5 years, right? So here we have to understand that these are the autonomous hill councils which are, say, mandated by the Constitution of India. But this is not the same with the case of Manipur. In Manipur, the parliament actually passed an act in 1971, right, where it said that the constitutional provisions will be applied, but a parliamentary act will be imposed. But before this, we have to understand the background. Now we have to understand the British actually bought these areas under the Government of India Act, under excluded and partially excluded areas, right? But somehow the Manipur areas were never actually brought under the 6th schedule. While the Maharaja of Manipur in 1939, they agreed with the British to exclude the area, right? But in the 1960s, the demand rose, and also while the constitution was adopted, Manipur was not given this 6th schedule status. The demands were since 1960s to actually include this, and that is why I told earlier, in 1971 the parliament actually passed a law known as the Manipur Hill Areas District Council Act, where most of the provisions are like the autonomous district councils only under the 6th schedule, but there are various differences. The differences is that, the very first difference is that the ADC is actually from the Constitution of India, but it is, in reference to Manipur, it is a statutory, and whenever there is a statutory versus Constitution of India, it is always the Constitution of India's provision which are far more supreme, far more protective. Then we have to understand that the powers with respect to ADCs in Manipur are limited to personal matters only with respect to, say, marriage, divorce and social customs, wherein we have seen the ADCs can, say, frame laws on health, sanitation, forest, water, agriculture. These are also non-personal nature. Manipur ADCs also have to root the laws through the hill area committees, right? And this is also dilution. This is also dilution because they have to go through the state legislature, right? Also the financial devolution, the taxation powers are also not so strong, and Finally, the ADCs of Manipur actually under the supervision of Deputy Commissioner, who can also, with the consent or assent of the governor, they can also dissolve the ADCs. So we can see naturally the ADCs in Manipur are far less superior than the ADCs under the 6th schedule. So we have to keep these things, keep these distinctions in mind, right? Because these can be asked in the prelims. So I hope the discussion for today was very fruitful for you all. I hope you all the best for your studies. All the best. Good luck. Thank you.